Hi, my name is DeDe Gardner. I'm the Director of Research and Evaluation with the Allergy Asthma Network, and today I'm going to be presenting on the Patient-Centered Outcomes Research Model. Patient-centered means actively incorporating the patient voice in everything that we do. Patients, their families, and clinicians face a wide range of complex and often confusing choices when it comes to health and healthcare needs. They need trustworthy information to decide which treatment or other care options is best for them. Unfortunately, traditional health research, for all remarkable advances that it does produce, hasn't been able to answer many of the questions patients and their clinicians, family members face on a daily basis. Patient-centered outcomes research is a little bit different than our standard patient who is a clinical subject or a patient subject in a study. Here, what we're looking for is to improve the quality and relevance of evidence available to help patients, their caregivers, and clinicians, even insurers and policymakers to make better informed health decisions based on the research that is conducted. To do this, we want to work with all stakeholders to identify critical research questions and answer them using the Comparative Clinical Effectiveness Research Model. This focuses on outcomes that are important to everyone. Also, we want to be able to share the outcomes in ways that the healthcare providers and the patients find meaningful. This is extremely important for patient-centered outcomes research. Also, we find that it is important that patient-centered outcomes research helps people communicate and make informed healthcare decisions, allowing their voice to be heard when assessing the value of healthcare options. So, patient-centered outcomes research, or PCOR, compares the impact of two or more preventative, diagnostic, treatment, or healthcare delivery options on health outcomes, including those that are meaningful to patients. The goal is really to improve all healthcare with some type of evidence. So comparative clinical effectiveness research is the direct comparison of existing healthcare interventions to determine which intervention works best for which patient at what time, and which one poses the best benefit and fewest harms. This is important that when we think about patient-centered outcomes research, that we're getting the right treatment to the right patient at the right time, but we also are allowing patients to determine what those questions are and what those outcomes will be. This is all real-world evidence that is in existence today. So the question might be, who are the people that should we be studying in the population of interest? Or how can people, our patients, make an informed choice between options that are key factors when they're considering making decisions between or among options for healthcare or treatments? Also, what options should be compared when we're thinking about our research projects? We want to make sure that the decisions that the research is intended to inform make it easier for patients to make the best decisions about their care. So when thinking about clinical comparative effectiveness research, CER, we want to determine what a suitable question might be. So one of those, as you can see here, is what are the comparative benefits and risk of oral steroids and topical steroids for patients diagnosed with atopic dermatitis? You can see the two pictures here depicting the two types of steroids. But again, here we're including the patient or the people who will be involved in the research who are diagnosed with atopic dermatitis. We also want to make sure that we identify a couple of options to determine the benefits and the risks. And so here we're looking at oral corticosteroids or topical corticosteroids. And the outcomes would be important to the patient when determining which of these types of medicines would be best to use in their own healthcare. Some patients may opt to use the oral steroids based on their benefit and risk, or they may choose to use the cream, hydrocortisone cream, based on the benefit or the risk. if that is the two treatments that are provided to the patient in regards to the fact that they have atopic dermatitis. So again, suitable question gives you a couple of choices, gives you a patient population, and then allows the patients who are participating in the research to determine what the outcomes will be. Now, sometimes patients and practitioners will consider patient-reported outcomes as the same as patient-centered outcomes, and that there is some confusion here, so we wanted to clarify. Patient-reported outcomes are any outcomes that are reported of the patient's status based on what the patient's health condition is, and it comes directly from the patient without any interpretation of a practitioner. Patient-centered outcomes is the research that is specifically designed to meet the most important needs of a patient. The relevant data can come directly from the patient. So we're not looking just at the reported outcomes of the patient, where we're looking at patient-centered outcomes where the research is specifically centered around the patient and what their desired needs are at the time. Now again, two other terminologies that may be confused are patient engagement and patient-centeredness. So patient engagement is where we actually invite the patient, include the patient in all of the research process from the beginning to the end, from the design phase or the question phase all the way through analysis and even sharing the findings. Patient-centeredness is where we're addressing the questions that the patient or the caregiver have about a specific condition that he or she, they or they are living with. So patient-centered outcomes research is unique. It is not the same as the type of research where a researcher determines the question, the variables, the study design, and the actual actions of the research, and then how those results are going to be analyzed, nor how they're going to be disseminated. This is very different. It's very unique because the researcher actually invites the patients to be a part of the research team. The patients are trained very similarly to understand what like informed consent, the different terminologies. They take the different trainings that are necessary in order to be considered one of the research members. And again, they bring a uniqueness to the research project because they're giving their personal interest and their personal lived experiences dealing with a condition that sometimes researchers may not think of. And so those patients give us a new opportunity to understand where they're coming from and what outcomes will be most important to them. Also, carers or caregivers can be a part of this process as well, because the lived experience of a caregiver of a patient who has asthma, for example, what they live through each day is a little bit different than what the patient themselves is living through. And so their outcomes might be a little bit different than the patient, him or herself. Also, looking at prioritizing the questions that might be of interest to the patients may be different than the actual researcher, and so coming to some common ground to determine how the research project is going to move forward. These patients are actually research champions, if you will. Even their carers are research champions because they have, at the end of the day, taken part in a research project or research study, and now they're well informed as to what needs to be done, and then they can then champion for other patients to participate in the research process moving forward. The research champions are usually a volunteer type patient. They share their time and expertise about, again, living with that experience of living with the disease process, but they can also share their experiences with others through advisory boards or advisory groups, even interviews, videos, so forth, to try and encourage others to participate in research. One thing that we have noticed, and many of you may see this too, is that we are seeing that underrepresented minorities don't really exist in the research realm. And so they are lacking in our patient population. And so our results in many clinical research studies are not generalizable to all patient populations. So ensuring that all patients have a voice, it would be important to make sure that underrepresented minorities of all classes and ethnicities, race, religion, so forth, are included in our studies so that all patients are recognized and that the study results can be applicable to all patients. The patient-centered outcomes research addresses the benefits and harms of different interventions. This can focus on the prevention of a disease process or prevention of like an asthma exacerbation. It can focus on the diagnosis of the disease, the therapeutic interventions, even palliative care, or even a healthcare delivery system. This could include your patient, him or herself, or their caregivers to be engaged in this research. Does not mean that they are the actual subjects, but it doesn't mean they can't be a subject. But the point is that that's not the only role that the patients have. The patients are involved in all aspects of the research from the beginning of the question all the way to the end of the project, including the sharing of the results. We want to ensure that we are considering the patient's needs and their preferences when it comes to looking at the research project that you're wanting to implement. So an example here is that even though we have two different age populations in the pictures, you do have two different devices provided to a patient who might have asthma or COPD. We have a meter dose inhaler with a spacer type device, and then also a nebulizer. We could pediatric patients may choose one device over the other versus an adult patient choosing one device over the other. Again, it's their preference and what would be best for that patient. And then for them to help us determine what the benefits, the risks are, and even the harms that might take place based on this type of intervention. And then at the end of the research project, we would be able to share the benefits and the risks of each of these devices, when to use them, how to use them, what is most important to each of those patient populations with the public and with other communities of interest, to where every person would be able to make a decision if they would prefer to use the MDI with spacer or a nebulizer at the right time for that right patient. Again, we're looking at individuals and their preferences. They want, the PCOR model expects for individuals to demonstrate what their preferences are, give them the autonomy to make choices, listen to their needs, and help to focus on the outcomes that the person cares about most. And these outcomes could be anything from their quality of life to the symptom scores or their own function, or even survival in some of the disease processes that have a poor survival outcome. Now, with patient involvement in patient-centered outcomes research, we want to pay close attention to the conditions that provide a heavy burden on the patient themselves, their caregivers, or a healthcare system. We also want to consider the chronic or comorbidities that do exist, or conditions that might vary across different subpopulations. We talked a minute ago about underrepresented minorities. So if you are looking for patients to be involved, we really want to ensure that the conditions that we're looking at, if they are heavily burdened on that underrepresented minority group and their caregivers, then we want that may be a place to focus on a condition or comorbidity for these patients. Now, patient involvement in PCOR is that the patient themselves are included. They will build a relationship with you as the researcher, and we will help them to build skills that are targeted towards research, from developing strong questions to completing the ethics and safety type of trainings, all the way to being a part with the patient, integrated and interlocked all the way again from the question to the end of the project, including the dissemination. Patients are excellent at identifying some outreach ideas, such as in their own communities. They may actually come up with different ideas on how to get information out to people about your project that you may never have even thought about. Also, patients may serve on advisory panels or even participate in workshops where you're explaining projects to patients or potential patients coming in, and patients are your best recruiting methods. Also, they can serve on your research team with the appropriate type of training, And then they can share and uptake those findings because, again, they're your biggest cheerleader when they're going out into the public and sharing the results of your process and also sharing their experience with your research process. They will be able to, it's kind of like that train the trainer program. Corey, what we like to do is to invite the patient to participate in the planning part of the research. So they're going to help develop the question and identify what your outcomes are going to be, and even develop your objectives with you, determining what those objectives and how to measure them. They also can define the characteristics of that patient population that you're really wanting to target. And as we've shared before, if you're looking for underrepresented minorities and you're inviting underrepresented minorities to participate in your research project from the beginning to the end, then they can help you identify characteristics specific to that patient population and even the disease condition that you might be considered along with the interventions. They can help to draft and revise different study materials or protocols, especially if protocols don't make sense to a patient. It's going to be difficult for them to follow. We want to make sure that all patients have access to studies because studies do have some of the latest and greatest of the medications or treatments coming out, and patients who aren't able to participate in those studies are being excluded. And so we want to make sure that those protocols are user-friendly for all patients to participate. Also, again, that recruitment of the study participants, they're going to be your best cheerleaders to go out into the community, invite them to be a part of your project. And then the data collection and even the analysis. Many of our patients might have skills outside of, have skills that are a part of what they do on a daily basis, and they may actually provide a different insight that you may not have thought about on how to analyze your data, or even what variables to consider as confounding or not. Participants in the recruitment and also in that data collection, they really do give a unique and varied perspective on how to interpret the data that me as a researcher may not have seen. People are going to say, can patients really conduct research? And the answer is yes, that they can, but it does take time. So researchers have to change their focus to some extent because it does take time to train patients on how to conduct research and what informed consent is. All of the different terminology and nomenclature is extremely important. So developing a program that you're able to create something similar to a PCOR ambassador or a patient ambassador who can help you with your research project. Those patients who can conduct research, they are wonderful representatives on different types of advisory boards within your organization or within your research project, and they can even make the board a little more robust than what one that does not have a patient's perspective on it. Patients are extremely important when it comes to guideline and protocol development for national or international organizations. Their perspective is extremely important, again, because if the protocol or the guideline doesn't make sense to a patient, then how are we going to implement and disseminate that protocol or guideline? They are also great at looking at the evaluation of your patients and stakeholder engagement. They can participate very well as getting others engaged, but being able to meet with your stakeholders and share with your stakeholders why it's important for patients to be in part of the process actually may result in more funding because you do have patients involved. And they can ensure that authentic and that their authenticity is valued for what they are doing and participating with your research project. So patients on dissemination or sharing of the research, this is a little bit of a different mindset and a little bit of a different mind bend, because when we think about writing up our research results, many of us are all about the peer-reviewed journals, but I can tell you that patients are authoring manuscripts. They may actually be one of the authors. They may be a co-author on a manuscript, and I've seen recently that the patients are actually the first author on some manuscripts. So depending on what it is that you're focusing on, be thinking of a couple of different ways of disseminating your manuscripts. One might be peer-reviewed or peer-reviewed presentation abstract protocol. poster presentation might be something that you want to do as the researcher, but there are opportunities for patients to also author those manuscripts, the posters and the abstracts, to take them out into the communities, to get them into the patient's hands, so that the patients then have that information to make their decisions as to what care they want, or what intervention makes sense for them. And that also kind of plays into the idea of shared decision making. So the patients themselves can actually present the study findings, to your peers or even to their own peers. Give them opportunities to be in front of the public. They can also be interviewed by news media, or else on something like a blog or even a podcast, where the patient and maybe the researcher could ask questions back and forth and be able to share those study findings. Those are great ways to get the information out, and also to give your patient the opportunity to be in the limelight. Next, we could offer patients the opportunity, again, to share their perspective, but again, it's a different audience. Again, if you're in academics, you're very focused on getting those peer-reviewed journals out, but I can tell you that the patients, they are wanting access to those peer-reviewed journals, but there's also other opportunities for them to participate. And so it would be up to us or our research coordinators to identify some of those opportunities for patients to even share the progress of what they've gone through being a part of your research project as a team member, not as a clinical subject. Also, they think creatively, I should say, and can give us some different ideas on how to share that information out into the public and bite-sized information, utilizing some infographics, different mechanisms of getting information out to the public that maybe as a research scientists we may never even think about. So utilize your patient's mind and their voice. So an example of a patient-centered outcomes research project here at the Allergy Asthma Network is the Engaging Hispanic Asthma Patients in Patient-Centered Outcomes and Clinical Effectiveness Research nationwide. So I recognize that, nationwide being here in the US, however, this project could take place in any country. So this project started out focusing on patients from the Hispanic Latino community who were diagnosed with asthma and their caregivers. We pulled together a patient advisory group that was made up of about 6 to 8 people. We included a faith leader within the Hispanic community. We included 4 to 5 different patients. We had a couple of parents of children who've had asthma. The children were young and also adult adolescents. And then we had a few patients with different severities of asthma. And then we had about 3 to 4 physicians who were a part of the group, 2 that were focused on asthma and 2 that were focused on COVID. So that advisory group developed this beautiful landscape that you see with the colors, the pictures, the font, the way that the wordings were read, the title of the project. So the title of our 6-session series, this was a webinar series utilizing the Zoom platform. The PAG picked that out as well because that's what they were used to using. But they wanted to have a title of the project that was very united, and so this is referred to as the Unidos Hablamos Day, or the United Let's Talk About, and then we provided a different topic. So here you can see Facing the Pandemic was the title here, and the patient advisory group, they developed the entire process. So they developed what the outcomes were going to be on the pre and post knowledge testing or questionnaires. We had a program evaluation that they developed. We also had them determine what would be an appropriate compensation for patients' time. We had a compensation for their time. We had compensation for our faith leader and for the physicians who participated. And the PAG were the ones that helped us to identify those. We also partnered with the National Hispanic Medical Association, and that association provided a physician who gave some insight, and then also identified a few patients to participate in the webinar series. So the patients, again, we met monthly for about 9 months, and at each agenda item, we would meet and discuss not only the topics of interest, but the next topic that would be taking place the following month. We reviewed the timeline every single meeting that we had, and we also met to determine the deliverables. So the deliverables were these flyers that you see here. They had to develop the template for the presentations, the objectives for the presentations. They reviewed the presentations, and then one of the most important pieces was that when we applied for a grant to provide this patient-centered outcomes research project, the funding did not cover the interpretation or the translation. Our PAG was adamant that this was extremely important to the community of interest, and so we were able to identify funding that then covered the translation and the interpretation. So when people were to listen to the Zoom webinar, they were able to either listen in Spanish or they could listen in English. And so that gave us two options for them to be able to participate. We had polling questions throughout the presentations so that they could be engaged and not just listening to a voice because we don't have video either. So it gave us an opportunity to get them engaged during the presentation. And then we also had the chat available for questions. And then we had the question and answers at the end of the session. So the PAG did participate as panelists, and so they were able to share their own lived experiences participating in research if they have done that before as a patient or a practitioner. And then the practitioners shared their insight and value of patients participating in patient-centered outcomes research, and then even shared their publications that did show the impact that these patients provided with their research projects. So this was one example of a patient-centered outcomes research project. There's a number of ideas on how to bring patients into the patient-centered outcomes research projects. Any project that you are developing can benefit from having a patient or two participate. Also, guideline development is a great place to bring patients in to participate with writing up the questions, and then also going through the process of what it takes to create a guideline, and then what it takes to then publish that guideline. So because guidelines are useful if we're implementing and uptaking them, but if we're not doing that, then those guidelines, that was a lot of effort and energy for them to sit there. So patient-centered outcomes research is something that is being adopted throughout all types of research, from focus groups, patient expertise, all the way through to clinical research, into implementation, translation, and out to the public. NIR is the National Institute for Health and Care Research. It is a major funder of high-quality global health research that directly addresses diverse health needs of people in low and middle-income countries. They use the UK aid to fund quality applied health research and training of areas of unmet need. And in 2021, they were able to push out the participant and research experience survey to over 20,000 people. And 20,000 people completed this press survey. This was the first year that there had been a national standardized set of questions for the participant and research experience survey. And they provided a great insight about what it takes to participate in research and how research is delivered on the ground. Also, the patients were providing feedback that enabled NIR the opportunity to improve their diversity of research nationally. So they had 15 different centers or networks that with partnered organizations who supported this survey getting pushed out in the year to the different networks of people. And so they were able to, especially during COVID, they were able to get over 20,000 people to participate. And what they found is that 93% of people who participated in research felt that their contributions were valued by the researcher. Also, they found that a large percentage, 93%, also felt that the researchers' staff was treating them courteously and respectfully. And 94% of that 20,000 said that they would participate in a research project again. And then most of them, 96%, felt that they had adequate information to take part in a study. And then 89% said that they had been kept up to date about what their study was. The big take home here is that patients want to participate and they want to be a part of the studies, they need your assistance or the research and scientist assistance on learning the terminology, nomenclature, being involved, learning how to go about moving through the different processes of research, and then last, being able to disseminate that research in a different way than what we as scientists are used to doing. They're able to get the research into the hands of the patients, where we're really wanting that research to end up. We want it with our peers, but we also want the outcomes with the patients so that they can make decisions that are meaningful to them on how they want to be cared for or the intervention that they want to participate in. So in closing, I encourage you to encourage your patients to participate in research, and I've shared with you my email address, and I'd be happy to talk with you more about the patient-centered outcome research model. Thank you and have a great afternoon.